Production funding for Sports Files is made possible in part by
Infinity of Memphis has moved to Germantown Road, just half-mile north of Wolf Chase Galleria, and is proud to support WKNO for its quality broadcasting and service to our community. Quality and service? No wonder Infinity of Memphis feels at home on WKNO.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Today on Sports Files, we'll take a stroll down Memphis sports memory lane with local sports historian John J.J. Ganazzo. Since my arrival in Memphis 20 years ago, the Memphis sports landscape has gone through quite a metamorphosis. Just in the last 2 decades, FedEx Forum was built to house an NBA team that arrived at the turn of the century. Memphis went from a AA baseball city to the home of the AAA Redbirds, which brought with it a first-class stadium in AutoZone Park. Memphis housed a world heavyweight title fight at the old Pyramid Arena, now the largest Bass Pro Shop store anywhere. On and on and on I could go. But while the landscape has dramatically changed, the history of sports in the Bluff City began well before I arrived or even was born. In fact, monumental moments started taking shape in the late 19th century, some memorable and some forgettable. Today, we will look at some of that history, although honestly, it'll be just the tip of the iceberg. And joining me to do it, Memphis sports historian John J.J. Ganazzo. And it's next on Sports Files. JJ, always great to have you on the program. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So much we want to get into, but I thought with the Super Bowl being 2 weeks from now, I wanted to talk about the history of professional football in Memphis, because a lot of people only go back to the 70s. They think of the World Football League as the first time having professional football, and so many close calls with the NFL, which we'll talk about. But the history of pro football in Memphis goes way back to the 20s and the 30s. You did so much research on this. Let's talk about that, John. Let's talk about the start of professional football in Memphis.
Well, it started by Early Maxwell back in the mid-20s in Memphis, and we had a team for 10 years. And Clarence Saunders of Piggly Wiggly fame, he was part owner. We've had Hall of Famers. We've beaten NFL teams regularly, and only thing that closed us down was the Depression.
Where did they play the games at?
They played most of the games at Hodges Field, which was built in 1916 and was where the Veterans Hospital is located today.
So again, this was a team not associated with the National Football League. This was an independent team, and they would play teams from other independent teams, and then they would occasionally play teams that are actually from the National Football League?
They played independent teams around the country, all-star teams. They played NFL clubs, and we were in the league a couple of years called the American Football League, and that was pretty much it.
Why would the NFL teams want to play an independent team from Memphis?
To make money. In those days, I guess the pay scale wasn't that great, and at the end of the season or during the season when the NFL clubs had buys, they would play teams in the area, and we would play Chicago, Green Bay, we'd play teams Baltimore, which was later, they came down from New York, just to make money.
They played one year the Green Bay Packers, who were the defending NFL champions, and beat them?
In December 1929, the Packers went 12-0-1, won the NFL championship. A week later, here in Memphis, the Memphis Pro Tigers beat them 20-6.
Was that their nickname throughout their tenure in Memphis?
The first year they were called the Memphis Hurricanes.
The Memphis Hurricanes?
I don't know why.
Was it well received by people? Did a lot of people go to these games?
We'd average 5,000 to 10,000 a game, which at that time was very, very good.
Some of the players you mentioned went on to become Hall of Famers. They played with teams in the National Football League. Give us a few of those names.
Well, Ernie Nevers, the Chicago Cardinal great, he played here. Carl Hubbard, who is in the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He was a player here. Let's see, Johnny Blood McNally, he was a player here. And then another one was Kenny Strong. He played 4 years, and he went on to play in the NFL. So the quality of players was high, and the team was successful every year.
And there was a uniqueness about one of those players. Didn't he also make the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame?
That was Carl Hubbard. He played, he was an umpire, made the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame as an umpire. He worked with the Memphis team here, and then of course he was a lineman for the Memphis Tigers.
So JJ, we had this long lull from the 30s after this team folded, the Great Depression. Obviously, economically, it wasn't a great time, until the 70s with the World Football League. I would imagine during that time, city officials, and I'm guessing this, approached maybe the NFL or tried to lure in a team. Did they not? Could they have gone actually 40 years without trying?
Well, there wasn't much expansion in those days of the NFL, and Memphis they just finished Crump Stadium in 1940s, so the facility wasn't big enough, I guess, to hold a NFL team.
All right, we fast forward to the early 70s and the World Football League. I grew up watching some of these games back in New Jersey, and I remember this team from Memphis because Jim Kick, Larry Zonka, and my favorite player of all time, Paul Warfield, became members of the Memphis Southmen and Grizzlies,
yes,
which is ironic because we have a basketball team nicknamed the Grizzlies. Tell me about how it came to be that the city of Memphis became a player in the World Football League.
Well, John Bassett wanted to have a World Football League to rival the NFL. He wanted to put a team in Toronto, and John Bassett, who owned the Toronto team, was willing to step forward and have a team. The Canadian government got involved and said, no way, so the Toronto Northmen became the Memphis Southmen.
And then how did they, with the Grizzlies nickname as well?
The Grizzlies was the secondary nickname for the Toronto team, so Memphis kept that nickname and actually had a live grizzly bear as a mascot.
The games were played, I assume, at Liberty Bowl Stadium?
Liberty Bowl Stadium.
How was that received?
The attendance was pretty good, 30,000 in the summer, which was in the early fall, was pretty good. And they had an average team until Kick, Warfield, and Zonka came about in 1975, and they had the best record.
Who were the local owners?
Local owners, John McVay was the general manager coach. John Bassett owned the team.
So Bassett still, even though in Canada,
he bought the
still
team.
Kept hold of the team as far as owning it. Okay. There was also expansion at about, 75 in the National Football League?
The National Football League was going through expansion. Memphis had a better chance without having Toronto come into town. That sort of alienated some of the NFL owners, and we got shut out.
That was the year that, who came into the league in 75 in the NFL? Was it Carolina?
No, Carolina and them came in 86.
So who ended up getting the expansion at that time? Do you remember off the top of your head?
No.
Okay, but Memphis was shut out. And you think if they did not have this team from Canada that became a member of the World Football League, that they had a better shot to get a team?
We had a better shot.
You move on from the World Football League, and then all of a sudden, here comes, in the early to mid-'80s, the United States Football League. Another league trying to rival the National Football League. And we know the history. It's a pretty good history of the Memphis team here, the Showboats. But the league obviously ended up only being around for, 2 years?
Well, toward the end of '85, the league began to crumble, as did the league previously. And even though Memphis averaged 30,000 a game, which was good, it fell through again. And we had some telethons to try to get the NFL to pick Memphis in, but that was when expansion came around again, and they picked Carolina and Jacksonville.
So that was Carolina and Jacksonville. And that local ownership, if I'm not mistaken, is a former guest of ours here on Sports Files, Billy Donovan, right?
Billy
he
Donovan,
was involved in that.
Logan Young, who big Alabama supporter, he was part of the owner. And Memphis probably had one of the best defensive players anywhere, Reggie White.
One of the greats of all time. So it lasted 2 years. Did the league last 2 years or longer? Do you know?
Toward '86, they filed a lawsuit in New York against the NFL.
Right.
And won, but only got $1.
Yeah, and of course, Steve Earhart, the executive director of the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, was...
He was the general manager there, and then with another pro football team we had here later.
The Canadian Football League is the next professional sports or football entity in Memphis. When I came to Memphis in 95, thereabouts, 95, 96, whatever it was, 1 year, Memphis Mad Dogs, Canadian Football League in Memphis did not make any sense to me. It obviously didn't make a lot of sense to people because it lasted 1 year.
Lasted 1 year. They had an American division and a Canadian division. The entire American operation ceased that 1 year with the field with the 55-yard line and 12 players and 3 downs. Even with Pepper Rogers as coach, it didn't get along too well.
Do you think a lot of people just had trouble adapting to different rules for how they knew football?
Yeah, and then we had to play early because the season ended early in Canada because of the cold weather.
Joe Horn, I know, was a standout player on that team. So the Canadian Football League lasts a year, and then the Oilers come to town. We know that the Oilers are going to be headed to Nashville. The Houston Oilers, a National Football League team, is going to make a pit stop in Memphis for a couple of years. It ends up being only 1 year. It ended up being a mitigating disaster because people did not want a team there for a year or two as a pit stop on their way to Nashville.
Well, the owner alienated Memphis first when he didn't know where Memphis was in a comment he made. And we had the team here, and Memphis was more of a stepchild to Nashville because they were going to get this new stadium, a new team, and we were going to have it just 2 years. It got so bad, the last game, we had more black and gold Pittsburgh in the stands than blue and white Oilers.
Do you look at that, and I don't know if we'll have time today, but we're going to have you on down the road, and we certainly appreciate getting the insight from you, JJ. But some of the black marks, if you will, of sports in the history of Memphis, that has to be one of them, right?
That has to be one of the top 3. When we got shut out with the NFL, and then the idea of having a team here for 2 years, and then the ownership taking it away, playing in the smallest stadium in Nashville. So, I mean, that had to be civic pride hurt.
But despite being shut out from the National Football League and having this Oilers team, which now, of course, are the Tennessee Titans, stop over for a year, Memphis wasn't done with professional sports because, lo and behold, here comes Vince McMahon from WWE, WWF fame, and the XFL. And the Memphis Maniacs came to town for a year. What did you think of that, and what was the reaction to the Maniacs?
As a statistician, the first game they played, we got a report on this box score that the Memphis ball carrier had a 161-yard touchdown run. And I said, what? And what happened, the statisticians and the league officials were hired by WWE. So that tells you something there. And the way it was given to me is that the ball carrier crossed the field twice and came back down the other sideline, and they said they guessed at 161 yards. So that's...
Should we be surprised in a league in which they had a player go by the name of He Hate Me?
Yeah.
So it was a little wild, it was a little out there, and it lasted only a year. And that was in 2001. It's now 2016. We have not had professional football return to the city. But what we've had over the years is a lot of college football, and not just with University of Memphis / Memphis State. As you know, the SEC has always had its footprint in Memphis. And we were talking before we started taping this that there were years and years and years of SEC big-time doubleheaders that were held at Crump Stadium.
Yeah, in the late 40s and then into the maybe early 60s, it would always be Tennessee and Mississippi State in an afternoon game, and Ole Miss would play Kentucky or Vanderbilt or Arkansas in a night game, and both games they had over 30,000. Memphis was SEC country, and probably still is to some degree.
JJ, before we wrap it up, I know you put together a list of the 5 moments Memphians would rather forget. We just talked about the 1-year deal with the Oilers. We're going to stay here for 2 years, and that was a black eye on the city. But there's 4 other events. Very quickly, let's touch on these. Way back in 1906, who even thought there was a history of horse racing in Memphis?
Memphis was one of the leading horse racing centers in the country. We'd have newspaper columnists from London, from Philadelphia, New York. They would come on Memphis to see the Tennessee Derby, the Gold Cup, which was the Super Bowl of Tennessee of Hornets racing, and the Tennessee Derby was more popular than the Kentucky Derby. And in 1906, the legislation outlawed gambling, and away with it went horse racing.
So you had both horse racing, harness racing, and then they ended up having nothing.
We had 5 tracks here.
Oh my gosh. 1936, NFL Commissioner Joseph Carr, league icons Curly Lambeau, George Halas, inviting Memphis to join the NFL, and that didn't work.
What happened there was they came to Memphis and they said that the original Minnesota team was leaving, and they wanted Memphis to enter the league because they had beaten up on Green Bay and Chicago, and all they had to do is bring $5,000 to the league meeting in the spring. Well, during the Depression, $5,000 was like $5 million.
Right.
We didn't have it.
It never happened.
Never happened.
Rustwood Park, of course.
Rustwood Park,
burning down.
the premier venue of Memphis sports, burned down on Easter Sunday, 1960, and with it went 60 years of baseball in Memphis, and it wasn't until 8 years later that we were back in pro baseball.
One final moment that Memphians would rather forget, a moment that I witnessed with my very eyes, and we go back to the 07-08 NCAA championship game and essentially the infractions that the NCAA unfortunately bestowed on Memphis. Let's talk a little bit about that.
That could be a good point and a bad point. The good point was we had such a great record that year, ranked #1, won the conference, won the regional, a few seconds short of winning the national championship. Everybody was happy. Then, a month or 2 later, shut down by the NCAA for something I really don't understand why it was Memphis's fault.
Involving Derrick Rose and I think the taking of the ACT. One event that you don't have on here that's very similar to what we just talked about with the Tigers in 07-08 was also the Dana Kirk team, the Final Four team.
The team that played Villanova in the Final Four, we got stripped of those recognition also.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate that that's a black eye also on Memphis. But there's a lot of positives. There's a lot of great moments. Down the road, we'll get you back here. We'll talk about that. It's always a pleasure to have you on, JJ.
Thank you very much.
Great work. We really appreciate it. That is local sports historian John J.J. Ganazzo. We'll take a short break. Overtime is on the way. Now, speaking of great sporting events in Memphis, the 14th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day game was held this past Monday when the Grizzlies played host to the New Orleans Pelicans. Of course, the game is only part of the story. Throughout the weekend and culminating on Monday, the Grizzlies honored the National Civil Rights Legacy Award winners. And every year, the city is treated to amazing stories from some amazing human beings associated with the great game of basketball. This year, the honorees were Jalen Rose, Tamika Catchings, and Hall of Famer Spencer Haywood.
Martin Luther King Day is the anniversary, of course, of the birth of the Reverend Martin Luther King, and an opportunity to reflect back on social justice and where we are at that point in this country, to celebrate how far we've come from our troubled past, as well as plan how we'll move from here to an even more equitable place. And to take note, of course, of the opportunities we all have to make a positive difference right here in the present, in this moment.
We get judged on every single tweet, everything we put out there get judged negatively or positively. And that's something that I know even for me, before I put something out, I'm thinking like, okay, who will this affect and how will it affect, and if it's something that I'm passionate about, I'll just speak about it because I'm willing to take the hit if it's something that somebody else doesn't agree on, but. But it is what it is.
Growing up biracial, my mom being Italian, my dad being black, I never really fit in with anyone. I was never white enough and I was never black enough, so I had a lot of hardships coming up. But with the situation with Mr. Sterling, it was unfortunate, but it came down, we were in the playoffs against Golden State. Everyone's saying, hey, don't play, but we had worked so hard to get to that point. We kind of wanted to sit down and brainstorm and think of another way or an idea to show that we understand what he said was wrong, but we still wanted to do it for each other. So myself and Chris, we sat up late talking, and I just said, hey, let's put our shirts on inside out, and once we get out there, let's put our shirts at half court, and that was something we did. Like I said, unfortunately, I think racism is something we've come a long way, but it's still very prevalent in our society. I don't think it's going anywhere. Unfortunately, we have to learn different ways to deal with it. Like I said, again, that you put a lot of onus on parents because it's not only colors, it's sexual preferences, and a lot of different things that people are discriminated against. So I think it's great that athletes and musicians and other entertainers want to step up and speak to it again because, like I said, I think it's not necessarily more meaningful, but it may stick coming from your favorite athlete or favorite musician than your mom and dad.
Curt Flood was there fighting for the rights for free agency for baseball players because before Curt Flood, you could not go from another team to another because the owners said that I own you until your contract, not only your contract, but I own you internally and forever. And so you had Curt Flood, and then you had Muhammad Ali. They're fighting for the right to fight and not go to the Vietnam War. So there I was in the middle of these cases thrown in. And here I am. I just wanted to play basketball, and next thing they knew, next thing I knew,
gold medal, right?
Yeah, I just want a gold medal. But then I was getting ready to go into the NBA, and they said, "Well, you can't play here. You haven't finished your 4 years of college." And I was like, "Well," so Sam Schulman says, "Well, I'll tell you what. I will pay you." The owner of the Sonics said, "Well, I'll pay you for this year. Just sit out and let this thing fly over, and then we'll go." And I was like, "No, I had to fight."
Right.
And I spoke out of turn because I didn't know it was going to be a big fight, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the organizers of the civil rights movement at that time was Thurgood Marshall and all those people. And there I was in front of him at the Supreme Court, and he's looking at me and I'm talking to him, and he handed down my decision, Haywood versus the NBA, and I was like, I won. I was 20 years old, so I'm looking at all these things. But my real shoulder that I stand on is my mother, Eunice Haywood, who was picking cotton at that time for $2 a day in Silver City, Mississippi, raising my sisters and brothers. And I always looked to her and said, well, if I can get through this, I will get you off your knees and give you this place where you really should be recognized. So that's my giant.
I remember being in college and Big John Thompson, who was the coach of Georgetown, was walking off at the beginning of the games because of Prop 48 and all of the things that he felt like were unjust about how that was being administered. And they reached out to us to be a part of that movement. And had that happen a couple of more games, we were going to walk off.
Wow.
So everybody has their different approach to how they want to get to an outcome, but I understand the power of $1 because I grew up without any. and how do you get leagues, NBA, NFL, NCAA, to acknowledge what you're saying and actually act on it? The only way they truly will do it if they see that you're willing to make that fiscal sacrifice.
We've come to a point as a society, and especially our younger generation, they're so unappreciative. And it's more of an expectation. And so one thing that I talk a lot about is learning how to appreciate the little things that we give. What Martin Luther King has taught me, what my father and my mom, all the people that have come before me have taught me, hopefully when I hand it over, they'll be able to keep it going and there won't be any drop. But if anything, like our parents, they always wanted better for us. I want better for the future generation. When I have kids, I want my young girls, if I have daughters, I want them to have the opportunity to have a goal, to have a dream, and to be able to do something that they love because they want to follow in their mom's footsteps.
Once again, kudos to the Grizzlies organization for putting on a first-class event. And speaking of the Grizzlies, after tonight's game in Minnesota, they will return to the home hardwood Monday when they play Orlando, and will also host Milwaukee on Thursday. The Memphis Tigers men's team will be in action tomorrow when they host East Carolina in a rare Sunday game. And that'll do it for now. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Production funding for Sports Files is made possible in part by
Infinity of Memphis has moved to Germantown Road, just half-mile north of Wolf Chase Galleria, and is proud to support WKNO for its quality broadcasting and service to our community. Quality and service? No wonder Infinity of Memphis feels at home on WKNO.